So actually, it's really the questions that have just had are really relevant, and I think will be good for the discussion that we're going to have after this next presentation, because it really is all about data. And how do we collect it? What do we need for data? And how are we going to share it? So Sean Smuckler and I are on a regenerative soils technical working group. And today I'm going to present where we're sitting with our draft recommendations right now that are coming out of this technical working group. And I'm hoping that I can solicit some feedback from people in this room on, are those appropriate recommendations that we should be putting forward for possible implementation by the government? And if so, how could they best be implemented and achieved? Okay. So I'm not sure, probably a lot of you here in the room have heard about this ministry's advisory group on regenerative agriculture and agritech that was formed last year. And this advisory group, it was formed to provide some strategic advice to government on opportunities to promote innovation, technology, adoption, and regenerative practices that will increase the productivity, profitability, and sustainability of BC's food system. So in January so there's this larger advisory group, and in January of this year, they released their strategic framework. I know you can't read that, it's just there as a shiny picture to show them that this is available online if anybody wanted to go see, but it's not really relevant. Well, it is, but it's not as relevant to the talk today, okay? Because I want to get into the technical working group. So the ministry's advisory group, they formed 5 technical working groups, and they were established to advise on a definition of agritech, how to provide extension services, how to provide incentives to incentivize the adoption of regenerative practices. One group was formed to look into the development of some regenerative agriculture standards. And the 5th one, soil health. And that's what I'm talking on today. It's the group that Sean and I are part of. So the scope and purpose of our technical working group was, we recognize that soil health is a fundamental process or component of regenerative practices. Understanding impacts on soil health is required for identifying, promoting, and adopting regenerative practices. Currently, there's a lack of consensus on how we assess soil health. And in BC, there's a lack of, understanding of soil health on a site-by-site basis and crop-specific evidence. Relating it back to looking at the diversity of production that we have in BC. I think we have some challenges that are fairly unique in the country, just given the diversity of climate and production systems that we have. So our goal is to develop a high-level set of recommendations for a provincial monitoring and evaluation strategy for soil health. And those recommendations are guidance for developing some prioritized actions and a set of projects that would be required to effectively monitor and evaluate soil health and changes to soil health from farm to regional scales. Okay. So right now, the 5 recommendations that we've come up with are developing a soil health baseline, having a structure or system in place for monitoring and evaluation. And that's around BMP adoption and monitoring those impacts, around data management and sharing. How do we take that data and how do we visualize it and how do we disseminate that in terms of promotion or knowledge transfer, and developing a long-term sort of support network to advance these and implement these recommendations. Okay. So under a soil health baseline, we identified where several needs were. There's very little provincial data. We don't have a good sense of current soil health, provincially across agricultural landscapes. And producers don't have a benchmark to compare to. Right, we've got limited data for measuring the regenerative nature of new and alternative practices on soil health. We've already had a lot of conversations about, evaluating BMPs and quantifying both their kind of the mitigation, soil sequestration, as well as co-benefits around them. And the data that does exist has some limited potential for broad comparison across regions or over time. And I guess I was just talking there's an absence of a soil health assessment protocol. So the recommended actions that we're suggesting to realize or develop a soil health baseline, we have to agree on a set of indicators that we would like to adopt. And we're suggesting that we form a soil health working group, of different academics and people working in this space, to develop a tiered soil health indicators that are, they're tiered in terms of cost, effort, and accuracy. So not to be confused with Dieter's tier 1 and tier 2. I think this is a little bit different. And fostering the adoption of standard research practices by establishing and publishing sampling and analysis protocols of soil health indicators, and working with commercial labs to offer these services. So, I was already talking about that earlier. So I guess, a question to maybe think about for the discussion at the end is, what is the role of, government versus others in promoting these practices and establish, should maybe publishing those standard protocols be something that happens on a government website? Is it better situated, say, on the UBC website? And how might we work with commercial labs to offer these services? I know we already heard maybe some limitations or considerations for that. Okay. And then in order to start developing this baseline, is launching a series of projects at various scales to develop a provincial baseline. So I had mentioned before that maybe any ministry funded projects going forward, we might require, measuring that set of soil health indicators, whether it's our own like on-farm research and demonstration projects or other research that we might be contracting through universities, for example. And of course, we're thinking that if it's an add-on to an existing research program, that we would compensate for that additional testing and analysis. Okay. Developing some regional sampling projects to target key land uses and commodities. So, the first point there on that's a little bit of a piecemeal approach to collecting some of this baseline data, if you're just doing it piggybacking off of research projects. So we probably need to have a program in place that's going to go around and more strategically be sampling to develop that baseline. Okay. And we need to ensure that there's sufficient, effective, timely, and affordable soil testing options accessible to farmers across BC. Second one on monitoring and evaluation, where we saw the need for this was, there's little data linking soil health indicators with measurable changes in agricultural or environmental outcomes. Limited regional data showing how different practices impact soil health status. Producers don't fully understand the value of soil health for either short or long-term production, benefits and resiliency, or the benefits to soil biodiversity, other ecological goods and services like impacts on the environment, and how they might affect plant, animal, and human health. Society is not recognizing the benefits that producers are providing in terms of enhanced ecological functioning of their land. And once I see this as kind of like the social license component of it is maybe lacking. And we could help greater society if they understood what farmers are doing. Maybe we could start to bridge some of that divide. And the relationship between soil health and climate mitigation has not been effectively quantified for most BMPs, as we've been discussing over the last day and a half. So some recommended actions on how we could address these identified needs is, again, formation of a soil health working group, that engages with producers to identify and prioritize soil health outcomes that they're interested in quantifying, developing a prioritization of regions and commodity groups and BMPs to evaluate. Again, I was talking earlier this morning about the need to kind of focus on the set of BMPs and where they might be applied best in which regions. And developing and launching a series of research and demonstration projects for that prioritized list. So we needed a coordinated sort of approach to tackle these things. And the projects would quantify soil health changes and outcomes, particularly related to climate mitigation. So let's not forget about all those co-benefits too. Okay. So under the recommendation for data management and sharing, we identified that data does not exist and is not widely shared and is largely inaccessible by researchers or the government. We've just been kind of discussing that. There's no common protocols for developing and sharing data sets. And the responsibilities of data maintenance, quality assurance, and analysis are not clear. So to address this, we're recommending that the Soil Health Working Group develop some, data sharing protocols in coordination with, perhaps ongoing efforts of ACARN and the Living Labs project, and working with national efforts to establish a soil data sharing infrastructure. Can enhance current data collection and capabilities and capacity in BC, or amongst the BC Ministry of Agriculture, ACARN, to gather and share data until a national infrastructure is fully operational. What can we do to facilitate that? Okay, under visualization and dissemination, we could see this as knowledge transfer, extension type activities. So producers need to be able to easily interpret their soil health data if it's going to be useful for them operationally. I'll just comment, Jeff, you brought up A&L offering a soil health report. Well, in my former position I was in, I tried interpreting all of those, and I know they give kind of like almost like a heat map, a scale of where you're at, but what does that mean for producers? As a nutrient management person, an agrologist, I had a hard time translating exactly what that meant for producers or how it could be applied. So
it's just the same as a one-time soil test. You have to compare it to something that happened the year before.
So it's
next year. Yeah.
So currently there's a large variation in the interpretation of soil health information, right? And there's no centralized communication platform. So we're recommending that we develop a series of soil health tools. These could include fact sheets that are developed as communication materials from all the research activities that are going on. Creating an online regenerative agriculture soil health dashboard. So Jeff, you just mentioned your comment right there, right? You're looking at a trajectory or what's happening, and then the same for like fertility tests is like, how am I seeing changes over time based on my practices? So can we have a dashboard online where farmers can input their soils data and actually see how, not just how they relate in terms of like their trajectory on their farm, but in relation to neighboring farms, like how do they rank amongst their peers? And of course, it's anonymized and just something for them to see so they can maybe know where they're sitting and contextualize that a little bit better. Now, of course, privacy issues and everything aside, having this dashboard where farmers could input their data, maybe that's a way that we could be generating a larger data set that could be used for interpreting what's going on. Right? We'd like to create a multi-year extension program to promote and support the adoption of soil health indicators and tools across researchers and producers. I'd see within the ministry, our regional extension model is one way that we're already moving forward on this, but how can we work with other people in this space who are providing similar services? And so we're not there's a lot of money, there's a lot of activity going on in this space right now. And how do we not just trip over each other, but how do we kind of support and coordinate our efforts on that? I feel like there's also the need for some extension and outreach initiatives for agrologists, not just our producers here. We need to build some capacity amongst our qualified professionals in the province And create a common framework so that soil health data is understood and interpreted in terms of the benefits that are related to biological diversity and function, quality of our environment, as well as plant, animal, and human health. So in order to achieve this, we need to have a long-term support network, right? So what we've identified here is that without a historic soil health baseline, along with coordinated and consistent monitoring, it's likely that changes in many soil health benefits will not be clearly quantifiable over the next 5 years. Right? Providing guidance for maintaining and improving soil health requires a long-term commitment. And at present, there's limited collaboration going on. And there's no permanent organized group to kind of bring all those voices together into the room to address these needs now and into the future. And there's no current plan to address this province's soil health needs into the future. So we need to come together with a collaborative strategy to measure and improve soil health over the long term. So we're recommending to develop support for maintaining a social soil health working group in the long term, so we can come together regularly and collaborate and make decisions on a provincial soil health strategy. So we can measure, long-term impacts of management and changes that are happening, and respond to those changes as needed. The soil health working group might be, and this is open for debate, it could be facilitated by the Ministry of Agriculture and Food within our resource management unit to provide some of the technical support, ensure coordination of activities and alignment with provincial mandates and transparency. So really where this sits is we're not sure, is government the right place for some of this to sit? Is it better maybe situated with ACARN or with a university? I think that's a discussion that needs to be had. So that's what we're thinking of the technical working group right now. John, before we get into the questions, did I misinterpret anything, or do you have any comments to add on that?
Yeah, other than maybe just saying who's part of the technical working group and the overall working group.
Sorry, I failed to acknowledge the rest of the members on the working group. So also we have Carmen Manhas from Terramera is on our technical working group. Mike Bomford with KPU, and Heather O'Hara, BC Farmers Markets, right? Are all part of the members on our group. And where we're sitting right now is, I guess the term of our technical working group goes until May this year. So we're feeling, we've had some iterations back and forth to come to this point. But I thought it would be really valuable to gain some perspective from the people in this room if they feel we're on the right page. In there's I've alluded to how we might implement or achieve some of these things, but I would really like to get some feedback on, how can we implement and achieve these goals? So I'll open it up to the group. Yes, Steve.
Well, I'll jump in right here. It's a very comprehensive and very ambitious. So I think the ministry and the province, with their funders, should dedicate some specifically to start implementing. So you need somebody to carry the load, and maybe you've already thought that out. And with a decent budget, because that's a very ambitious task you're taking on, very worthwhile. But I think it needs resources and funds to start implementing.
It certainly does, and we've recognized that it won't be successful if there isn't some base funding dedicated to it for a longer period of time. Who does this sit with, and who should be driving it forward, right?
Tom Odell online has a question or has a hand raised. So Tom, do you want to go ahead?
Thank you. Thanks for that presentation, Greg. That was very interesting. One thing I'm seeing missing, as you point out, we don't have a agreed upon set of indicators, and we don't have necessarily strong relationships between indicators and other desired outcomes such as crop productivity and so on. And so what I'm seeing missing from this is that research linkage to bring better support to which indicators are going to give us the most bang for the buck. Maybe that's part of your long-term support, but I don't see it explicitly in here.
Yeah, I did distill the content down in the slides to squeeze it all in. I believe that would be part of the soil health working group would be to decide upon, like, have representation across academia and different researchers and government, bringing in probably some representation from industry as well that could help us initially settle on a set of indicators that we could move forward with. Sean, did you have a?
Well, I mean, I think that comment's right on, and I think we tried to articulate that in number 2, the development and prioritization of the BMPs to evaluate, and then clearly the next step is to evaluate those. That's an important research endeavor, and that's the next point there, research and demonstration projects.
Yeah.
We are at 12 o'clock, so we can do a breakout now to further discuss this in small groups. Does that sound good to you? Yeah, I just want to make sure that we have some time for discussion and I know you also wanted to have as part of that discussion before we break for lunch around the Ministry of Agriculture's potential role in the BC Living Lab.
So if
So
we're
maybe we
sitting
could do both.
yeah, if we're sitting at noon right now. If we can, so as you guys discuss about how we might implement these recommendations, because this is really around how we, right, and how we measure, outcomes and changes that are happening with respect to soil. And so the other conversation I wanted to have before we break for lunch was, how might we tie in with Living Labs on some of this work, or what role could Living Labs play? And how can maybe the ministry support Living Labs? Like, where you guys see limitations in Living Labs? Maybe, you don't feel because of there's a lack of replication, for example, in the work you're doing through Living Labs. Like, is there something that the ministry can do to build out those projects to be a little more robust, so we can maybe develop the emission factors that we're interested in? Or so I think we could kind of combine those two discussions on the recommendations from our technical working group with also how can Living Labs kind of support the implementation of that, and how we can serve each other's needs.
Right, before we break, just one comment. I mean, I heard comments yesterday and I heard comments today about there's data out there. I mean, this is what I see you're talking about is like going forward point. But one of the issues I see is that we have a huge pool of data, and Kirsten and I had the conversation about a pool of data that is out there. Nobody can access it, and or you can access it, but it's completely anonymized as to where the geographic location of that collection. We've got data, and I'm going to point at a prof who has grad students who have data in their theses that are point in time or 2 or 3 years of data for their theses. It's a whole bunch of data, and it's not capable. It was shared in a thesis, but it's not capable of being shared to anybody else. And all of that data, like I'm looking at the soil nutrient studies from the Okanagan in 2007, 2005, 2012 in the Fraser Valley, and the 2020 data that you collected on phosphorus and nitrogen. There's huge amounts of data. Yeah, it's not all of those soil health indicators, but it's some of those soil health indicators. We have a tanker truckload of data that's not being used,
and
and it's a base.
I want to add to that, because I was thinking right along the same lines, of course, as you, Jeff, is we do have a huge amount of data. We don't have a process for sharing a lot of those data, but we also don't know what data are available. So I think the first step would be an inventory of what the heck is out there and who has it.
And all of that, I'm not talking about private client data or individual farmer data. I'm talking about data that was
Yeah.
collected by government or,
Agreed.
or universities.
Yeah.
Right, so it already exists, it's somewhat in the public realm. Yeah, it's got privacy agreements because of species and whatever else, but it's much more public than me going to, Tom and saying, Tom, give me your soil test data from your asparagus patch in summer, right?
So I think that's a great conversation to have in the breakout group,
Yeah.
really, because that could be, and one of the things that the working group developed is, well, let's figure out where we are and what our starting point is.
Yeah, I just want to say thank you for the talk. It's really exciting to see. I haven't been sitting in the BC soil health round, but these conversations are certainly happening across the country. They're happening within the Forest Service. What data is there? How do we make it available? How do we make it common going forward? And then also at a national level, what the drive to the databases and making all the information available. So I just wanted to say that it's not just here, these conversations are happening at different levels. Thank you for bringing it up.
And that's something we shouldn't just be working in our provincial silo either.